I used to be able to say that I just didn't like any survival games. This is no longer true thanks to the 2018 game Subnautica, released by developer Unknown Worlds. Through clever use of sound, story writing, and atmosphere, this game has managed to draw me in a way that no other survival game has. This review will contain mild spoilers for creatures and locations as well as tech that you can find in Subnautica. Nothing in it is so significant that it should ruin your experience, and nothing in it is also not something that's not visible on marketing material. But from this point on there be spoilers, do be warned. First, it addresses the game's performance. Subnautica has developed a reputation for running poorly on higher-end PCs. A recent patch as of August 5th claims to have improved these performance issues for a lot of people. The game ran fine on my mid-range computer, maintaining a stable 60 frames per second, except in some of the above water areas, where it did dip down. As is the case with performance for a lot of games on PC, your mileage may vary. At first glance, Subnautica may appear to be your standard survival game. You have meters for hunger, thirst, and oxygen, seeing as how the game takes place mostly underwater. Unlike most of the other games in the genre, the moment you exit from your escape pod, you will immediately be introduced to the mechanics that'll help keep you alive, as well as local species of fish that you can catch to convert into water and food. One of the first things that you'll construct is the scanner. The scanner is your best friend in this game. It's the way through which you interact with the rest of the world, through which you learn about the world, and through which you progress the story in a big way. This is something that I really like in Subnautica. At no point during the game do you transition into a point where you become the thing that nature should be afraid of. And the fact that likely the first thing you are to construct in this game is the scanner kinda sets the tone for the rest of the game. You interact with the world as an explorer, a type of scientist. Somebody who's out of place where they currently are. And as many other reviews have stated, the oxygen mechanic is a good way to limit the player's progress. It makes sense that you can't go deeper, because you're a land mammal and therefore require that pesky oxygen. If you're also not a big fan of survival mechanics like me, the game does transition you away from being just a survivor fairly quickly, and you're only really in as much danger from the survival mechanics as you put yourself into. I will admit that it can on occasion create for some tense moments of gameplay that are mostly of my own doing, when I get overly arrogant with the oxygen meter. As I said before, the scanner is your best friend in this game, and most creatures, plants, and Altera wreckage from your ship can be scanned for blueprints or information that'll either reveal greater plot points about this world, things that you can build, or general information about the creature. What I like is that these background details aren't necessary to enjoy the plot of the game. However, if you do choose to go into them and read all of these things, they do tie together in a small way that teaches you more about how this world evolved, striking a good balance between lore and story, which is something that a lot of games fail to do. As the story unfolds and you learn more about the world and you're driven to go deeper down, you'll also gather blueprints to construct several vehicles to help you. You can name these vehicles and one of them is fully customizable on the inside, and I'll be damned if by the end of this I didn't grow attached to my big red sub named the Errant Venture. One of the tools that you get can also allow you to build bases, with interiors that you can customize, and you can build several useful machines inside that helps you take care of the survival mechanics. This game actually has a story, and a pretty good one at that. It makes excellent use of environmental points of interest to drive the player towards where they want you to go. For example, one of the first things that you'll see as you emerge from your pod is the wreckage of the Aurora. It provides you a focal point, and there's not a player out there who wouldn't look at that and say, I should probably go over there sometime. You may also notice that the moment you get out of your pod, there's nothing updating you on what to do. You're left to your own thoughts. This is another thing that I really like about this game. In a lot of moments in Subnautica, you're left to only your own devices and your own thoughts on what to do next. The game is confident enough in itself and confident enough in the player to not coddle you and hold your hand all the time. It doesn't need to tell you to go over to the Aurora because it knows that you probably will. And it doesn't need to tell you to be there in time for the Sunbeam Rendezvous because you'll probably be there in time anyway. And if you miss it, you miss it. Which is another thing that I genuinely like a lot about this game. The ability to miss out on things, because it creates for a subtly different story from other people who play this game, making your playthrough feel unique. This is aided greatly by the fact that the game also has several B-plots going on at the same time, that are completely optional to find and follow, but most of those B-plots will also take you to the places where the main story happens. The game also actually has an ending, which I greatly appreciate, but that's about as much as I can go into the story without getting too spoilery about it, or any specific details. So let's move on to the graphics presentation. The game sports a slightly stylized cartoony graphics style that I think will age very well going forward. It has the potential to look absolutely beautiful in some of the darker areas, especially once the bioluminescent life comes out. And while we're on the subject of darkness, Subnautica makes excellent use of the dark in several places. With areas like the kelp forest, somewhere where you're generally fairly safe, looking fairly intimidating during the dark, simply because you can't see that well, and your only source of light as you go deeper, where the light can't reach you anymore from up top, is the light that you bring with you. Visually, I like how all the creatures look distinct and alien, but yet they're close enough to something that we would recognize that we can puzzle out what they are and if they're going to be dangerous to us or not. Or at the very least, we can take a fairly good guess at it. That's also something that's very much influenced by this game's sound. This game has a damn good musical soundtrack if you're into this kind of synth thing, like I am. And in some areas, especially as you're descending into the dark, the music track that kicks in really helps reinforce the atmosphere. All of the creatures in the game make a distinct noise that you can learn to recognize. This is especially important in areas with larger predators, as it really helps build up the atmosphere. In these areas you can almost always hear the larger predators, even when you can't see them. I'm going to bring this up again in the next section of the review, but we'll leave this here for now. The unvoiced protagonist is something that I also think benefits this game really well. Like I brought up earlier in the sunbeam scene, the only thoughts that you're left with are your own. The game is not telling you how to feel at any point. Often in these kinds of games, and in horror games specifically, the voiced protagonist may come across as afraid or enraptured by something, when in reality I'm not, and that creates a huge disconnect that kind of turns the game into comedy when it should be tense. Subnautica doesn't suffer this problem, because the only thoughts from the character is my own thoughts being projected onto him, such as in the moment where the sunbeam arrives. Subnautica greatly benefits from knowing how to exploit silence properly, and it's this along with everything else I've mentioned up to now in all the other sections that creates Subnautica's main selling point, the atmosphere. All the things I've mentioned in the previous sections contribute together to form what is maybe the single best atmospheric game in gaming right now. You're never really in any true danger in Subnautica, at least not any more than you choose to put yourself in, but the graphics, the sound, and the story work together in such a good way to exploit basic human fears of the dark, the deep, the sea, creatures that we don't know, or basically saying just the unknown, to create such a tense atmosphere at times that you feel like you're in a hell of a lot more danger than you actually are. This can affect even safe areas like the kelp forest in the shallows where your escape pod is, where at the dark, just because you can't see and you've heard a sound that you haven't heard before and you don't know where it's coming from, it actually creates a tense moment of fear, where the logical part of your brain knows that you aren't in any danger here. But that doesn't stop the voice in the back of your head that says that we shouldn't be here, mate. You can also notice this in the areas with the big predators. As I mentioned before, you rarely ever see the big predators, but you can always hear them. This helps preserve their mystique, and also avoids the pitfall of making your largest, scariest predator, thing that you want the player to be afraid of, changing it into an irritation. Because you rarely see them, you'll rarely die to them, but they're always there. Which in the end means that the player's brain will do half of the work for them. And this ties together with something that I mentioned earlier, that in this game you're never really in any more danger than you choose to put yourself. The sheer panic and amounts of tension that you feel when one of these predators do actually decide to attack you is magnificent. And the best way to illustrate this is to play a short clip of me getting attacked by one of these predators in my submarine that also happened to contain just about everything that I'd made up until that point.
Hull integrity low. Warning, predator attack.
Oh no.
Warning, fire detected.
No, we're okay. No, we're No, not like this.
Hull integrity critical.
Get abandoned ship. It's gameplay moments like that that make Subnautica such a unique thing to me, and why I love this game so much. After not being sure what the predator was going to do, and it coiling up and looking like it was going away, I thought I was fine. But it was actually just speeding up to come and get me again. I then panic, crash the sub into a column, and decide it's time to abandon ship. Seeing that it had backed off, I then decide I might try to pull my sub back from the brink, and even that managed to be tense with the panic music in the background, the red floodlights and the thick plumes of smoke meaning that I couldn't really see where the fires were coming from, and then getting the notice that the hull integrity is about to break. This is a situation that's pretty much of my own making though, and that's what makes it so good. This is another place where the game makes excellent use out of silence. The moment that all the fires are put out, and the sub is restored to emergency power, and it's dark inside, the music stops, and the sound stops, so all I can hear is the environmental sound around me, allowing me to collect my thoughts and calm down from what just happened. The game gives time for the events to sink in. It's this atmosphere that's managed to create some of the most memorable moments I've had in gaming in the last couple of years. And it's this atmosphere that managed to carry me through a survival game with survival mechanics that I otherwise find very obnoxious, and never liked in the past. Subnautica is a magnificent experience and a fantastic game, and I'm very glad that I ended up playing it even if it is a couple of years after it came out. It expertly combines the graphics, the sound, and the story to create an atmosphere so thick you could cut it with a knife. And it's this atmosphere that manages to carry me through the rest of this game above the little things that I don't like. There's nothing large enough wrong for this game in my eyes to detract from the overall experience. Mine is perhaps the performance issues, if this is something that would affect you. I would recommend this to anybody who can give this game the time required for it to sink its hooks into you. There is almost no other atmospheric experience like this game out there. And I'm very much looking forward to Unknown Worlds' sequel, Below Zero. My name's been John, thanks for listening, farewell.